Hello, I hope you're all well. As the world is going to shit, I thought I would do a really light and just fun video and talk about my favourite classics, that also like my favourite books, through their 1-star book reviews on Goodreads. The first book is one that you're all expecting, which is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Couldn't give a shit, and believe me, I tried. I feel like we've all been there. This next review I loved. And I will say one thing about Goodreads review is they're like metaphors and similes they use are on point. Some are very strange. I have a very strange one in this video. But this one I love and I've never thought about it that way. And she says, I felt like I was reading with someone else's prescription glasses. Everything was so scattered and unfocused. When I was going through the Goodreads site actually, a lot of people who didn't like Miss Dalloway really just didn't like the writing style. It is done in a stream of consciousness narrative, which I think some people really connect with and others just don't, which is fine. And I'll have to be honest, the first time I read Mrs. Dalloway, I found it quite a hard and cold novel, but it wasn't until I think the second or third time that I read it that I really felt the emotional depth of it. Then we move on to two Jane Austen novels. So two of my favourite Jane Austens are Emma and Pride and Prejudice. I added Pride and Prejudice in because I felt like it was probably the most popular Jane Austen, but Emma is definitely my favourite. So one for Emma is Yawn, I tried, but life's too short. Plus, I like them crude and crass. I feel like this person needs to go and read 18th century. Obviously, Jane Austen is an 18th century writer, but she's not crude at all. But a lot of 18th century literature is filthy and bawdy. And if you like that stuff, go further into the 18th century, like rewind, because there is a lot of weird shit that goes down. The next review I picked really doesn't sound like a negative to me, but maybe because I love kind of gossip. Ugh, this was like reading a trashy magazine. You want it to be over, but you just can't stop reading. And I was like, what's the problem? I love a bit of drama and I love a bit of a gossip. And Jane Austen obviously is a lot more than that, but I really like that small town feel and making mistakes and the comedy of manners that goes on in Jane Austen. A lot of the criticism of Emma in Goodreads, in the 1-star reviews, was that Emma was really unlikable and everybody hated Emma. And I felt a little bit personally offended because I probably identify most with Emma out of all the Jane Austen heroines. A lot of people got really angry at Emma, and I totally get it. She can be frustrating. I think that's the point. As Jane Austen famously said, like, she made Emma to be a heroine that no one but herself would like. Fuck this book. Fuck Jane Austen. Fuck Unrequited Love. Fuck Emma. Actually, you know what? Don't. There are also some just like really long reviews by men. Like really long reviews. And personally, I love reading long feedback from men, especially in my own YouTube comments. One man did a very long review about how Emma puts him to sleep. He's actually called it the perfect non-narcotic cure for insomnia, and it can only rate to a classic owing to its age. Actually, that is another thing. All of these are obviously classics, and the majority of them started with like, I can't believe this is a classic, like why is this a classic? And then also people were like feeling sorry for the fact that they didn't like it, that they were kind of starting every review with, I'm sorry I didn't get it, or I didn't feel clever enough. It's kind of one thing I hope with my channel, that by talking about the books that I like and quite a few of them being classics, that maybe people who might have avoided them might pick them up. I hope they like them though. I hope they don't go away and leave like terrible 1-star reviews. Let's move on to Pride and Prejudice. This is a comment that I saw so many times for different books. And it is, in this review, is hatred is too strong an emotion to waste on this literary twilight. So many of these books were referred to Twilight, and don't get me wrong, I actually liked Twilight when I read it as a teenager, and I will read it again, but it has got like a sentimental place in my heart. But so many of these books, like Jane Eyre and like other ones as well, were all referred to as literary Twilight, or just as bad as Twilight. And it interests me because what was the book that everybody said, oh, this is just like that book, before Twilight came along? I feel like the police are here. The next one I think we can kind of all relate to a bit when you are reading classic literature, and it is Jesus Christ, Just Have Sex. I personally love a bit of tension and like the lead up to kind of, you know, when they're probably going to get engaged and they'll get married, when they can finally fuck each other. That kind of like, you know, the bit when they first maybe touch their hand. That's why balls are so sexy. It's like the first time you ever get to hold anybody else's hand. And if you watch the most recent adaptation of Emma, that dance scene, and even not in like classic literature or even in kind of, you know, Georgian literature, whatever, whenever I think of that scene in Sound of Music when Maria and Captain Von Trapp first dance, it's all I need. It's all I need. The next two I have compiled just because they annoyed me. There were quite a few that did annoy me, obviously, when I was looking through all of these, but these ones in particular, I mainly get passionate or angry at these ones because of my degree and my masters. But the first one is, why is this book considered a classic? It may have some classic themes, but it's buried beneath a pile of Victorian era garbage that is so convoluted and boring to read. Jane Austen was never a Victorian writer. Jane Austen wasn't even alive in the Victorian era. Jane Austen is an 18th century writer, yes, the long 18th century, but she was alive and writing during the Georgian period. There is nothing Victorian about Jane Austen at all. I know that when a century turns or whatever, people don't just wake up and go, I'm Victorian, I'm going to write differently. But there is a definite change in style and the way that books are kind of circulated and what have you. 18th century is very particular, and Jane Austen is not a Victorian. The next one just kind of pissed me off. This book is pure garbage, with forced dialogues that read like Bible verses, no story, no depth of characters, no actual development. That has to be the weakest classic ever written. And all of that stuff, I mean, sure, if you don't like it, but it also does have a plot. Like, it has a little arc. Anyway, it is grossly overrated because back then there weren't many female writers and Jane Austen was one of the first. There are so many other amazing writers who were writing in the similar time frame, similar era as Jane Austen and before Jane Austen. I mean, you're talking like Aphra Behn, Moira Edgeworth, Frances Burney in particular, who was a real inspiration to Jane Austen. Now we move on to Wuthering Heights. Now I only actually picked one review for Wuthering Heights because there are loads, but they were all very similar. In the same way of kind of Emma, you know, people just hate all the characters, and I completely agree, like they are awful. Again, with all these books, the criticism was fair, but this one made me laugh. This was unbearable. I hated them all and their weak constitutions. I loved that because I personally like reading about like not disease in like the Victorian period, but like literally weaker constitutions, and looking at frailty and fainting and looking at the body and weakness in Victorian writing. So that was a 1-star review, which actually just made me think of all the stuff I like about Wuthering Heights. But I thought it was funny. Another book I've only got one-star review for is Howard's End. But this kind of review falls into one of my favourite subcategories, which is alternative titles or alternative subtitles. And this is annoying people doing annoying things. A lot of the reviews, I'm like, especially when it comes to character, I'm like, they're supposed to be like that. Like, Emma is supposed to be selfish and snobbish. She's supposed to be. But also this obsession with people having to like their characters, I've never understood. The characters in the novel are not there for you to like them. Like, I don't find anything interesting or any fair criticism when people just say that they don't like the characters. You can say this is problematic, you know, you can point out the character traits, but I don't give a shit if you like them or not. It's like the most basic review ever. Not this person's, but just in general. It's the same with the next book, which is Madame Bovary. Everybody hated Emma. Everybody. The review for Madame Bovary I've got is another one of like my alternative subtitles, which I love, which is Spoiled Rich Girl is Sad. I found that really funny because what Emma wants is to be really rich and probably spoiled. Like, she wants a very luxurious and romantic life. And she's sad because she hasn't been given that. This novel was like arsenic poisoning with page numbers. All you have to say, mic drop. Literally scrolling through these and just everyone wants Emma to die. Everybody. I mean, she does, so I hope they were happy. The next book is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I thought there would be a lot of bad reviews of this book because so many people had to read it at GCSE level, and there is a running theme with all of these reviews. If people were like told to read them for school or university, everybody hates them, especially if they were reading it at high school. Completely overrated and boring. The guide barely kills anyone. It may have been controversial in Victorian England, but now it shows its age. Obviously it shows the age. It was published in like the late 1880s, I think like 1886 or something like that. Of course it shows its age, because it's a Victorian novel. What were you expecting? Now we move on to Tess the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. The reviews of this book were so problematic. I think out of all of the books that I looked through, there were loads that were just so victim blamey and were horrific. So much blame was put on Tess, and I know she's a fictional character, but it says so much about how we view narratives around sexual assault and just women in general. When I was looking for Tess the D'Urbervilles, I also found another genre of Goodreads review, which is the letter written by a man to the fictional female character. Why? Why is that a thing? But it was really common. I'm angry, Tess. I've got a lot to say to you, and I want you to hear it. How could you not see Alex's wolfish nature in the beginning? The man force-fed you fruit. This one really pissed me off, and this is an example of all of like the horrific victim blamey reviews that were with Tess the D'Urbervilles. Tess was a professional victim. I've unfortunately known lots of those. Tess was a woman living in a time when being a woman was depressing and sometimes dangerous. Totally unlike now, guys, right? The professional victim is one thing that, and then to be like, unfortunately I've known lots of those. Fuck off. Dithering deflowered damsel does dastardly deed. Dreary. And it's true, Thomas Hardy is depressing, which is probably why I love it so much. I love dark and depressing books. The next one I think is my favourite review of Tess the D'Urbervilles ever written. One can only get so far with wheat cutting and dairy farming. There were a lot for Jane Eyre, a lot of them very valid, as I said before, but the one I actually just wanted to flag is one I completely agree with. And it is just, this 1 star is for Bertha. I also looked at another Virginia Woolf, which was To the Lighthouse. This is one of my favourites, which is, I added a boring shelf to my Goodreads for this book. Because I like it, because they're disappointed at it being so boring, but they're organised. What I love is that when I look at their shelves, they genuinely have added it to a boring shelf. The next one is The Great Gatsby, and I knew there'd be loads of people hating on this book, and there were. The first one I loved because I thought it was like the best / weirdest description. In fact, no, the weirdest description of a book comes later, but it's a brilliant description that I've never thought about to how to describe a book I didn't like. And this is like a part of their review, I think it's the beginning of their review, and they say, I felt I'd stepped in something icky at the end of this book, which is like the perfect description of just like being uncomfortable when you just don't know what it is, and you're like, is it dog shit, is it mud? But I've never ever heard anybody describe a bad book or any other unpleasant experience as being like when you've like stood in something. So I thought that was genius. The next review of The Great Gatsby is another genre of Goodreads review, which I thought would be really uncommon and strange, but actually is far too common. And I'm just going to read it, and we'll get to, it's a journey we'll go on together. This book is to me the epitome of how tragic and meaningless your life can be if you try and satisfy your personal desires and depend on other people to fulfill those desires to the purpose of your whole life. Very true, kind of the point of the novel. And I recommend that anyone who reads it will soon find that only Christ can satisfy all your desires, and that serving him alone should be your utmost goal in life. Now, something happened there to get there. We now move on to my last book, and this isn't even like all of my favourite books or all of my favourite classics. There were just too many good reviews not to talk about, or too many bad reviews not to talk about. This, hands down, is one of the best pieces of literary criticism ever made, and the metaphor is so specific, and I don't get it, but I do. I'm going to read it to you. This is a squishy, nasty, burnt fish stick of a book. Fish stick. I don't know why I have trouble saying that. I also googled it and it is just a fish finger. I don't know why I couldn't have guessed that, but fish stick is, for some reason, now my tongue twister. Anyway, it's a squishy, nasty, burnt fish stick of a book. If my metaphors and similes in this review seem a little overwrought, just remember that I just finished reading Brideshood Revisited, and try not to hold it against me. It's just further evidence of how awful and poisonous this book is. To explain my fish stick comparison, this book is a poorly cooked fish stick that's cold and underdone on the inside, but burnt and ruined on the outside, just like the book. Never thought about a book in the terms of a fish finger, but now all my books will be judged on how fish fingery they are. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different video. Please let me know what your favourite classics are in the description. We can have a bit of a chat, and if you have time, why don't you go and have a look at the 1-star review of that book and let me know and we can chat about them. I hope you're all well and staying safe, and I'll see you again soon with another video.